Hasasaka, Nikyam Kakan Yamani Hedrick. Hi, my name is Yamani Hedrick. I am Maidu, Chickasaw, Taos Pueblo, and Ute. And today I will be reading our land statement, our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land which we occupy today as the traditional home of the Nisenan, Maidu, and Miwok tribal nations. These sovereign people have been the caretakers of this land since time immemorial. Despite centuries of genocide and occupation, the Nisenan, Maidu, and Miwok continue as vibrant and resilient tribes and bands, both federally recognized and unrecognized. We take this opportunity to acknowledge the generations that have gone before, as well as the present-day Nisenan, Maidu, and Miwok people. Aho.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for being here. I want to greet you as well. Enchim and Rios Chaniavu, Itom Ketchim, Alea, Amanet Votim Yavinewi, Inepo. Maeto Jesus, Valle, Potea, in Hiapsi Nealiaka, Eme Evichak in Iani, Matewame. I want to greet you that way in my language and say I'm Professor Jesus Valle. I teach here at American River College in the English department. And I also direct the Native American Resource Center, which is a physical space that we've had for the last 15 years, a physical student center to support our Native American students. My tribes, I'm Yaqui, Isleta, Apache, and Carrizo, enrolled Carrizo from South Texas. So the presentation today, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit, kind of the formal framing, and we are going to cover a lot of material, are the suspensions and expulsions from boarding schools to suspension board's report. This was a report that was put together by a consortium of Native educators, counselors, and recruiters in the Sacramento area, the Sacramento Native American Higher Education Collaborative, together with Dr. J. Luke Wood and his organization. We collaborated because we felt that there was a tremendous need to illuminate and to bring light onto the ways in which our Native American children are targeted for criminalization within the K-12 system. And throughout this presentation, I'll also be kind of relating the K-12 system to our current system here at American River College, and that there's a lot of resonances and similarities when we start to think of educational systems. I realized this morning that we're going to have to, before we even talk about the article itself, and the article has been out a few months now and is kind of gaining traction and has been kind of getting out there into the media, that we need to step back and we need to talk a little bit about historical context. Now, if you have a phone, kind of a really nice, fancy phone, you can kind of take a picture of this and you can zoom in right now and you can get a snapshot, and this QR code will actually take you directly to the full PDF of the article that exists in CCEAL, which is Dr. J. Luke Wood's organization. So go ahead and take a picture of that. My phone, and just point at it and it goes right to the website. So hopefully you can get the same. If not, you have the URL. So again, it's a joint publication. I was one of the authors of it. I'm obviously not the only authors. It took a lot of different input, a lot of different perspectives, including folks in the community, parents, and it really is, in a way, a grassroots effort by the Native American community to highlight some of the struggles and some of the challenges that our children face every day when they go into these school systems. So I want to read for you a little bit. We're kind of in the midst at ARC of doing a more in-depth look, a larger study of how we treat our students. And I want to also highlight right here at the front that when we're thinking about students in K-12, the Native students or any other student population, or even here at ARC, that is important that we avoid a deficit model, that we're not blaming the students for these outcomes. We're not saying these students, this is their fault, but we're bringing the lens to the system, that the system is creating the outcomes. It is a system that is designed in lots of ways to perpetuate itself and to create the outcomes that we see. And those outcomes are not just about suspension and expulsion, but those outcomes are broader and have to do with the overall psychological and psychosocial well-being of our Native American students. But let's take a look at some big picture stuff first. And so human beings have lived in this hemisphere since time immemorial. There's always been and continues to be vast linguistic, cultural, social, and material diversity between what are now called American Indian or Native American communities. Colonization by Europeans has occurred and continues to occur at various locations in this hemisphere along different timelines. First invasion of indigenous communities occurred, for instance, in what is now the area of the Bahamas in 1492, a little more than 100 years ago. There were still native individuals in Northern California seeing invading Europeans for the first time. And at present, there are uncontacted tribal communities in Amazonia. So when we're thinking, colonization and the process of it writ large in this hemisphere, it is a multi-time frame process. It is something that is still kind of moving along and playing out, and that various indigenous communities throughout the hemisphere are experiencing colonization in different ways right now in the present. So it is both a moment and a lengthy process. It is direct genocide as well as the genocide of the mind and spirit. The end point is the attempted erasure of indigenous people from the hemisphere. And if not, in fact, the physical erasure, then the erasure of native identity and the native sense of community. Native nations are sovereign. This means that indigenous communities are and always have been socially and politically coherent and organized with inherent rights to self-determination. At present, native communities in the United States exist in a state of active occupation. Virtually all native land has been expropriated by federal, state, and local governments or by individuals who are not of a particular geography. Additionally, native nations function under a vast burden of laws, federal, state, local, county, and so on, that further affect every aspect of the individual lives of American Indians. It is impossible to describe in this report the scale of human suffering that has been brought on by colonization in this hemisphere. And I truly mean that. We can write about it, we can talk about it, but we're living communities, living folks who have experienced a historical present and a present reality, and it's impossible to describe the scope of the trauma and the generational trauma and the horrors that have been brought about because of colonization. So we can talk about some of the direct actions and policies that have been brought about through this process. For instance, Native American students at American River College come from a variety of tribes, backgrounds, family histories, experiences, and these students may find their lives and educations profoundly influenced by a range of systemic and structural barriers to success. So again, the emphasis is turning the lens onto the system, right? And the subjective experiences as our students move into the system. What is the system doing to us, and what has the system done to us as well? And also, we have to understand that the story of each tribe is unique. Obviously, you saw within our introductions between Rena Horace and Yamai Hendrick and myself, we come from different tribes and different backgrounds. However, we are unified in the sense that we are native people from this hemisphere, and our communities are continuing to fight, and our communities are resilient in that struggle. Now, so when we think, going back a little bit, again, I'm going to give you really, in very, very broad strokes, some history that perhaps was not covered, was left out, and all of it is tied into an understanding, in dramatic terms, the expulsion and, the discipline rates that we see within the system. So we know that from first contact, right, in the Americas, the intention was not benevolent. The intention, and I frame this in dramatic terms because you have to understand that the malevolence of this contact has been sustained. And that's important, to connect the threads of what happened then to the outcomes and the impacts and the effects that we see now. And so we know that as the Spanish made incursions into the Americas, that vast numbers of American Indian folks in the hemisphere, native individuals, indigenous communities, were subjected to torture, were subjected to mass rape, were subjected to the extermination campaigns that were carried out. And these were carried out intentionally, right? The mass infection of individuals with disease for the point and the purpose of clearing, so quote unquote, clearing the land and realizing a manifest destiny idea. And so Native people suffered not just at the hands of direct genocide, right, but the indirect genocide through the germ warfare that occurred. So moving a little bit ahead, as we followed just the Spanish thread, we know that at some point the Spaniards established a mission system here within California, and that this vast, extension of the religious and political state, right, carried with it the notion of convert or die, right? And so Native tribes in each location we've always had our own ceremonial and spiritual practices. This gets to sovereignty, this gets to autonomy, this gets to our inherent rights to occupy a place and not be bothered. As the Spaniards moved in and created the mission system persisted for a very long time and was essentially bringing together native folks to slave, to labor. It was incredibly harsh, incredibly cruel. It was a very vastly distributed geographic system, and it's a system that persisted. And so thinking again to the historical thread and how that impacts the present, it left a legacy of trauma in families and on individuals. It also led to lots of direct loss, cultural loss, ceremonial loss, kind of folks being, given horrible conditions and choices, like if you don't, take on these Christian names, and if you don't take on and go through the motions of these religious ideals, we're going to slaughter your children. And so we think of our children as sacred beings. We think of how can we protect ourselves? How can we be clever? How can we be resilient? So in lots and lots of the native tribes who were Spanish colonized, there were very clever mechanisms that our folks used, indigenous people used, to hide traditional and ceremonial practices behind the colonial practices. So Saint so-and-so, right, the celebration of a certain saint or feast day would actually be, in actuality, still the community celebration of the rain or the earth or the harvest. And this was a widespread practice of survival and hiding in that and through that. I also want to highlight why this is important, because if you're in the K through 12 system, you know that for a long time in 4th grade, you have kind of the mission education, and for lots and lots of generations, you have people going in having to make, little models of California missions and sugar cube kind of little structures and celebrating this, right? But when you get into the shoes of the native folks for whom this was the era, the Holocaust, the tragedy, this is the concentration camp, you have to stop and think, what position are you putting those native children into when they walk into that 4th grade classroom? So we know that in California, I'm going to follow 2 distinctive threads here, one that follows kind of California's unique history, and the other that follows kind of the larger kind of pan-Indian history of westward expansionism. But we know by 1853, as California transitioned right into statehood, some of the foundational pieces of that were predicated not only on the ethos of the mission system, but also the transition to a different federalist kind of ownership, quote unquote, because from our perspective, their ownership is not how we frame things. Let's just say that. And so as the United States expanded and wanted to take more land, it got into a war with Mexico, and then forced Mexico to make a treaty. And then Mexico, which was an extension of a federal government very far removed from our California native communities here, decides, well, now you're all going to be, Mexico is going to go away and it's going to become United States, and this becomes consolidated under direct genocide of manifest destiny. So with that said, there were very horrible things that happened. The idea, we hope that the government will render such aid as will enable the citizens of the North to carry on a war of extermination until the last redskin of these tribes has been killed. Extermination is no longer a question of time. The time has arrived, the work has commenced, and let the first man who says treaty or peace be regarded as a traitor. From the Wairika Herald. Right here, kind of in local history, we understand Sutter, and you have a lot of Sutter history. And so there was a lot of things that Sutter did, but Sutter vastly contributed to, the stealing away of native children. And so California, interestingly enough, I'm going to kind of zoom up here so I can see. So the first laws that were enacted in California were pretty much the Indian indenture laws. These allowed for the indenturing of Indian adults and Indian children. And what it said is that any white person could go, and if you happen to see any Indian person whatsoever, and you judge them to be vagrant or loitering or just whatever, you could grab them and indenture them into endless servitude. It was a form of slavery. It was direct slavery. But also, the California laws then were expanded so that the children could be further indentured, and this led to the murdering of the parents or the outright stealing of the children to work in the mining claims. This was a pervasive practice at the foundation of California as a state. And so the state of California got involved. The government paid $1.1 million in 1852 to militias to hunt down and kill Indians. And then the legislature allocated another set amount of money for the purpose, also putting a bounty on the scalps. And if you go up here to Clear Lake, there's the massacre, the Bloody Island Massacre, in which people were horribly massacred and a few survived by breathing through reeds. And this is the horrible history of this place. And we think, well, genocide and this sort of bloodshed happens in far-removed places, but no, it's here, and it's ever present within the consciousness of Native folks. It never is far away from our minds. And so I don't have time to really go through a lot of this, but this is another account of the kidnappers in the Eel River. One of three was discharged, and the other person was discharged, and they kind of sent home after kidnapping the Indian children. And then pretty much admits to, well, I killed the parents, and that's why essentially I have the right to indenture, right, into slavery these children. This is heavy stuff. This is hard stuff. And even just putting this together, right, to be able to present this to you here is heavy stuff. It's an additional burden, right, when we think about the burdens that folks have to carry each within our identities, right, to make it through the day, right? And so when we think of Native resiliency, this gets to the fact that we're the ones, right? Our Native American students are the descendants, right? In some cases, 2 generations removed, in some cases 5 generations removed, in some cases 6 generations, right? Of those that they could not capture, could not kill, right? Could not destroy. We are the resilient descendancy survivorship of that, and we know that. So, peeling away from California momentarily, in other parts here of the westward expansion of the United States of Manifest Destiny, you do have the wholesale slaughtering, right, as a policy of Native American people. And this is outright extermination. We're not talking, well, we just killed a few. We're talking about the systematic, right, dispossession of an entire landmass, right? And if indeed an entire hemisphere in various ways. And so as we move through this, we understand, yes, Native people survived, but folks are also culpable, because when you look at this picture and you think the Congressional Medals of Honor that were awarded to the people who did this still stand, right? When you think that the Native tribes who bear the trauma, right, of this particular event still stand. And then when we each think of your own position, right, in this, you think, what current day privileges and benefits and securities do you enjoy in the society because of this? And we can pull some of that out a little bit later. And so the legal system being set up in ways that were exclusionary, right, to disenfranchise and to alienate and to say, now this land here, we're going to create a titling system, and through this titling system only white folks are entitled, right? That's where entitled, right, to the land. And so you get the wholesale disenfranchisement as a part of a system. So the widespread abuse of the environment, here, you know what these are? Anyone hazard a guess? Right, these are the skulls, the buffalo skulls, so that it was a kind of a policy. If we can really strip away the land of all its resource, right, in a very dramatic way, then we will simultaneously strip away all of the food resource and the clothing and the warmth. We can starve them out, we can freeze them to death, kind of thing. And so, as the railroad started to come through and folks had guns, they would, shoot, just kind of shoot out the windows as a way of contributing to what they considered to be their national good. This is an image of the Dakota 38. Anybody know anything about the Dakota 38? So they were ordered hanged by Abraham Lincoln, right? because they were individuals who were fighting for the rights and the sovereignty of their community. Glossing ahead and moving forward at a very fast clip, we move from the extermination of the spirit, the extermination of the mind. We move into a slightly different era. So Native folks at this point, the survivors are forced into a reservation period, right? In California, it's a little bit different because you had rancherias. And so as California Native folks were hunted down and slaughtered, the transition then happened from mission to ranches in which they were indentured and enslaved, and then into the rancheria system in which various tribes were kind of consolidated into various ranch locations and places. And in these rancherias continue, in some cases, forced marches, right? Happened right here in this locale. So the idea, the stated notion, then transitioned to, we have these Native folks, what are we going to do with them? We want them to be like us. We want them to become white individuals. And so the boarding school system was set up. The boarding schools were kind of farmed out to different religions, right, in various areas, such as, this is going to be the Catholic boarding school, the Lutheran boarding school, the Methodist boarding school. And then the children were taken at wide scale as a systematic process. And this happened not just in the United States, but also in Canada. Canada also has this portion of history in common. So the children were stolen from their homes and taken many miles away, in some cases hundreds and hundreds of miles away, to the boarding schools at this point. And the stated goal was to, if you can kill the Indian, you can save the man. That's a quote. That was the idea. And so here, this Native person, you can kind of see the idea was that if we can cut the hair and wash them out and get them to think and act and be, then maybe we can save them, right? And again, that's another important systematic theme, the idea of paternalism, the idea that we're going to somehow save the Indians. And that's an idea that really is problematic and hasn't quite gone away yet. And religion was decidedly wrapped up into it, that if we can get them to pray like us, and there's a lot of pictures I could show you, but again, I don't have time, then we can make them like us. So interestingly enough, as this process persisted, eventually the boarding school situation by 1900, by 1924, the situation, the population, right, was at an all-time low. It was a very kind of horrible period of time. And Native American folks at that time were in such distress that the Bureau of War kind of transitioned and became the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So there's an entire bureaucracy, right? First predicated on extermination, then kind of assimilation. And the bureaucracy then took over, right, the administration, or the misadministration, I should say, of all Indian affairs in the country. And there are many examples where, as tribes had treaties with the United States and treaty obligations, we'll give you this if you give you that, but not really because we got a gun to your head. Well, eventually what happened to all those treaty funds? They went into this vast bureaucracy that is the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so through that, eventually the Merriam Report came out in about 1928, if I'm not mistaken. And the Merriam Report was commissioned by well-intentioned individuals in Congress, and they said, we got to really take a look at this, because this is now on top, right, of everything that's already happened. Barely now we're starting to notice that this looks bad, right? This is starting to look bad. Merriam Report took a snapshot and said, this is actually really horrible. The Indian agent from each reservation is corrupt and siphoning off all the money. The people are starving on the reservations. It's, everyone is being shot on sight when they leave the reservations, that sort of thing. So as we move forward, jumping ahead a few eras, we move, kind of into what's called Indian reorganization by the 1930s, in which the tribes are pretty much forced into taking on a constitutional nature. And so tribes typically have a traditional leadership. Tribe knows what it's doing, knows how to construe leadership, knows what leadership looks like, knows how leadership functions, right? No, you're going to have to create this whole other bureaucratic layer. You have to have a constitution and a council, which, guess what, don't match up together with the traditional leadership in most cases. And then the council's kind of over here, kind of, how would you say, part of the corruption of the bureaucracy, where the traditional council led to a split. A little bit later on, the Dawes Act, everyone in Congress decided what we need to do is we need to chop those reservations up, because those natives, they have too much, right? They own this big, piece of land, which is not big in any sense of the word, but this piece of land. So it gave fee simple too, and created kind of a patchwork, so that each individual native person then technically, under the Western titling system, owned the land, then had to pay the taxes on the land, and then the land could be taken away that way, right? And so I've seen there's a little graphic online somewhere where you see kind of the land loss over time. It didn't take one way, shape, or form. It just gradually, like this, in different legal ways, legal mechanisms, extermination, until we reached the point where we're at today. In the 1950s, California tribes, the US Congress decided it was getting out of the Indian business. It was done with it. It was tired of it. And so started to unilaterally terminate tribes. That was the name of the program, Termination. And so California was slated up first, and a bunch of tribes were deemed ready for termination. And then the United States government said, okay, we're just done with you, and that's it. You're off on your own, and we are not even going to acknowledge any history, any obligation, treaty or otherwise, any social or moral obligation. That's it. You're no longer Indians. You're just US. And so sovereignty, again, is inherent in each tribe. The US government does not grant sovereignty to tribes, but the United States government does recognize formally indigenous tribes, right? And this is why we have federal recognition, federally recognized tribes. In other cases, you have tribes that are only recognized by states and not by the federal government. We have unrecognized tribes in California and elsewhere. In other parts of the hemisphere, each different federalist government, such as the Canadian or Mexican or Guatemalan government, has its own system for establishing a nation-to-nation relationship, supposedly, right, between itself and the tribes. Although the United States Supreme Court in the early to mid 1900s decided that native nations were not truly nations, but were domestic dependent nations. And those two words and those qualifiers are pretty dang important. So, join the fun. Interestingly enough, as the oppression and suppression of native identity continued and moved along, there were kind of these odd counter movements in popular culture for non-native folks to celebrate and take on native identity. And if you go into Canopy, there's a film that kind of touches on this. It's called Real Engine. It's made by native folks, and it's about native imagery in Hollywood. It's a fantastic film. But part of this, for example, is the Boy Scouts, right? Kind of as native culture was so heavily suppressed, the Boy Scouts took on native culture and said, well, we're going to pretend to be Indians. And this is a big part of why it's such a racist organization, to tell you the truth. And so you have, Boy Scout powwows and Eagle Scouts and kind of perpetuating of, we're honoring you, quote unquote. We're celebrating you, quote unquote. But this does nothing, right, to actually have an authentic dialogue and discourse with real, living native people, right? And so this is cultural appropriation. And cultural appropriation is genocidal in nature. And it extends not just here, but to Halloween costumes, right? And so part of the purpose of my talk with all of you today is to also to bring you along in this knowledge base so that you can become allies to Native people. And allyship to Native people does not look like this, right? Allyship to Native people means having authentic, open, and honest dialogue with us and understanding who you are, right? And understanding what historical legacy are you functioning under and what does that mean for you. So in the present day, when our expulsion and suspension rates of Native kids are off the charts because the system is targeting us and always has targeted us, it's still okay for the Washington Redskins team to keep their racist mascot logo and to encourage people, thousands, right, by the thousands, to do this. Now, what do you think that does to the minds of my children? I have 3 kids. Yet things have moved along such that in contemporary society we say, well, blackface is not okay, and these other things are not okay. But when it comes to Indians, you got the Cleveland Indians. So we're surrounded by a system, right, that is predicated on the extermination of my people. The physical, emotional, spiritual, and cultural extermination. So when my children walk into the school system, right, and they see this on the wall, they're looking up at Indian killers. They're looking up at their enslavers. They're looking up at the folks who ordered all of this extermination and perpetuated it and continue to perpetuate it. So if we think of 2 students, right, let's say you have just a white student going to school, K through 12, walks in, sees this, and it is reaffirming, right? It is reinforcing. This is my history. This is these folks, maybe you're thinking, yeah, they weren't perfect, but look at this great thing they built, right? But for us, we don't see it that way at all. This is our Holocaust. So to blast it into rock, right, the United States decided we're going to take the sacred Black Hills, right, of this tribe, and we're going to just put it up there for all of history to see that we're the bosses, right? But what is the moral cost? What is the human cost of this? Who's bearing the cost of this country and of this system every single day? So as we get to thinking about the actual thing I'm going to talk to you about today, which is the suspensions and expulsions, right? We got stories from folks, right? And so we know that our school systems are predicated on a kind of industrial, profit-based, manifest destiny-based system. Let's just crank out these workers to work without complaint, right? And so our kids are in this system, and the system is doing things to them. So here's a true story. One of our Native American students was in ceremony all weekend and went to school smelling of sage. Some tribes use sage, some do not, just to educate everyone. They were removed from class, questioned, searched, and local police were called as they refused to believe the student. The police performed field sobriety and determined the student was being truthful. Before being allowed to return to class, the student was told to change their shirt into a loner. For those facing dress code violations, the student's garment was sealed in a Ziploc to remain in the office until after school hours due to being a distraction. Later that day, the administration questioned the high-achieving Native American students exactly what saging was and if it was something smoked. After formal explanation from the new student, the other student's Ziploc shirt was returned, but for 3 weeks following, at random times, this student was removed and searched from the bus, asked to let admin smell their fingers, and embarrassed in front of peers by being followed and questioned. There's so much misunderstanding and stereotype because of how history is taught and what is taught about us that it directly impacts the well-being of our students because we are targeted within the system. And so, when we think of the repercussions, again, going back not just to boarding schools, but the burden of history, resistance theory asserts that during the educational endeavor, minority individuals actively resist and reject the implicit and explicit messages attacking their ethnic identity on a daily basis. That as resilient individuals, as human beings, we continue to live, and as my children go to school, as your children go to school, all of those conflicting messages are bombarding them. It's like, why am I being asked to memorize the names of these presidents that ordered these mass executions? Why? What good is this doing me? Who am I? What am I within this system? It creates lots and lots of cognitive dissonance and having to create alternative narratives even within the mind of that student. So our data came from the actual K through 12 system itself. And so when we look at that data, there are about 32,500 Native American students enrolled in K through 12 here in California, and that's 0.05 or 0.5% of all students. And so in 2017, there were this many, 3.5% total one-time suspensions in the K through 12 system, and Native students comprise 7% of total suspended students. Now, we're, kind of I'm running out of time, a big proponent of disaggregation. We'll get to some numbers here in a second. But again, to emphasize, the takeaway is that, you have to, like here, on the very first day of high school, there was a significant law enforcement presence on campus this morning. We can talk about law enforcement presence and what that means and what the atmosphere, what that creates, right? And what law enforcement may represent to different groups. And then after 30 minutes after dark, he called very upset. I was just held by police for being a Norteño gang member. My son was wearing his Native American necklace and T-shirt that had a Native American symbol. And so again, the takeaway is that when we wear our symbols of pride, we wear our symbols of identity, which we do very frequently, and some students choose to do so or not. And again, we're thinking ARC and K through 12. How does this trigger then, us just being ourselves, how does that then trigger all kinds of other, other dynamics, both between peers, between students, and between administrators to us? So let's look at some data here. So there's in-school suspension, there's out-of-school suspension, defiance-only suspension, and then overall expulsion. And so if we look right here, kind of the legend at the very top, this may be small for some of you, California is in blue, all students. Red is Native American girls, and then the gold here is Native American boys. And so you can see that the suspension rates differ. We can also kind of talk about why these two figures may differ. But within overall suspension, you kind of see that we're vastly overrepresented. If you're going into a system, right, that is already set up to assimilate you, marginalize you, to drive you to the edges, to hurt you, you're not going to feel very good about that sitting in those classroom seats. And again, I'm talking not just about K through 12, I'm talking about American River College. We can break this out in different ways for violent incident, with injury, with no injury, weapons possession, illicit drug-related, defiance. Now, defiance is interesting because defiance is a very subjective category. And I have a 13-year-old son right now, and being 13, he lives in a state of defiance. He truly does, to everyone and everything, and to me especially. And so, that's been an education for me to see this is just the mental, developmental, emotional space that this 13-year-old boy inhabits. Now, I've had to learn to be a different style parent, right? I've had to learn communication and restorative justice. I've had to learn all these other ways of approach. And then all of a sudden, it changes the tenor, right? But how are we doing that in our schools, in our classrooms? When a student sits there and is being told, recite that Pledge of Allegiance or else, right? What is the teacher bringing into that classroom along with them? What historical hang-ups? Let's look at more data. Statewide boys and Native American boys, statewide, and you can kind of see the breakout by grade. And it's true that Governor Newsom just signed kind of into law, right? There was a pilot effort to do away with willful defiance suspension only, because what happens when you get suspended? You lose out on learning. You lose out. There's a stigma. It's a school to prison pipeline. There's something there happening with it. It's not calling in to conversation. It's the opposite of it. So Newsom had recently signed that, okay, we're going to kind of do away with willful defiance suspension only, but only for this many grade levels and only for this many years, and then we're going to kind of see. Because it is an increasing problem, and not just for Native American, but for other people of color populations. and the girls too. And obviously you see it within 7th and 8th, that's kind of where that whole, adolescent dynamic kicks in. But again, if we take not the deficit approach, like with my son, what is the opposite of the deficit approach? I, as the adult, have to understand, okay, he's the child and that's what he's going through. I'm not going to penalize him for going through the natural process of adolescence. I am going to, in my adult and mature understanding, work with myself, right, to understand and to communicate. Then we broke it down by county as well. I know it gets really, really fine text. You can zoom in with your phones. That's what I always do. But you have the suspension rate, then the percent suspended with one, and then suspended with multiple. And you can see, like, for instance, here, this is Modoc, this is Lassen, this is Kings, this is Trinity, this is Yuba, this is Lake, this is Madera, Mendocino. So there's a lot happening there because the blue is the overall suspension rate, and these are where we're at. So I think that as we look at the data and we look at county-specific data, right, and these are the top 20 county native females in red and yellow, as we look at the county-specific data, we realize that there are some counties that have some real problems here, right? That this is systemic racism. This is an extension of the Indian Wars. This is the system all out failing to understand what it's doing, right? At a very human-to-human level. Because you're talking about, once again, and again I go back to that historical overview I gave you, the genocide at an emotional, spiritual, and psychosocial level of an entire population. So in order to, I can go on and on with the data, and we can look at counties, and there's some interesting patterns, right? When we look at kind of local history and like, wow, okay, what's the local history here with this county? What happened with that tribe relative to the people there? It's not, it's usually kind of follows very closely. So overall, review, the Native students have higher rates of single and multiple suspensions compared to all students. Native boys overall are more than twice as likely to be suspended compared to all students in California and have higher rates of out-of-school suspensions. Native boys and girls are more likely to be involved in violent incident suspensions with no injury and are likely to be suspended because of defiance. And 7th and 8th grade Native boys and girls have higher numbers of suspension rates compared to boys and girls statewide. So given all of that, and these are some of the highest counties, Trinity County, 90% of Native boys suspended, Lake County, 65%, Calusa, 100%, Kings County, 54.5, multiple suspensions. And then also by school, we did school district disaggregation. And so we're looking at certain school districts. And the ACLU has become involved kind of in the effort in looking at this because this definitely becomes a human rights issue. So we do have recommendations. And this is not a comprehensive list of recommendations. There's lots of other things we can look at. Provide professional development training for all K-12 teachers, educators, administrators on understanding Native American students. This goes for ARC. Right? If we don't have an educated teacher populace, then how can we expect the teachers to understand and know how to relate to Native American students? And that training can come through many different avenues and formats, partnering through the tribes, partnering through my Native American Resource Center, partnering through various organizations in the area. Also recommending to implement a culturally calibrated process for student suspension that considers Native cultural beliefs and values. And so we understand that our worldview matters. We don't want to be part of just the general worldview, right? That would be erasing active in our own erasure. We're not interested in that. And what that also implies is that folks within the system here, ARC or K through 12, have to kind of really open up and be able to step outside self and think, okay, this group of folks is telling me something. I don't quite get it. I can't see it. It hasn't been, but maybe I'm willing to learn more and to kind of trust and go along with it. To work collaboratively with parents and tribal officials to discuss issues that we need a lot more dialogue. There are Native parent groups that can become involved and are happy to become involved. Again, both K through 12 and American River College. We do have a lot of participation here from our Native parents of the Native students. And that also involve Native students and their voices in proactive discussions among school officials, policies, and practices that discriminate and target Native children. So the Native student voice is valid, it's important, and it cannot and should not be ignored. Engage disciplinary issues from a restorative justice lens that invites conversation, healing, and justice rather than penalization and fear. We do believe that there is space for restorative justice in this, that things can move forward in a positive way because they have to. We don't have a choice. There's not a single person in this room who's not obligated at a moral level to try to make things better, not just for Natives, but for all groups, right? Our collective level of humanity demands our attention. Create memoranda of understanding between school districts and California local tribes. Currently, ARC is working on this portion. We're working on a lot of these recommendations. And I'm really happy with how ARC has been responsive to some of these big picture concerns. And we're going to continue to push both institutionally here and in the larger outside community.